y'all. So I'm kind of looking at it's the Iran nuclear deal. We looked at it's called a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was done in 2016, I think is when it's actually signed in. 2015 is when they kind of like adopted everything and then everybody had to sign for it. But anyway, under let's see, trying to get my story straight or my timeline straight. So under the Obama administration, so I guess basically six countries came together to say that Iran couldn't have a nuclear weapon. And then let me think how this worked. So they released all the sanctions, allowed them to do trade, helped them out, blah, 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 blah. They started working with them again. They kept them, or they allowed them kind of into just like the economy in Europe and all of that stuff. And I know they're the Middle East. But anyway, so that was under Obama. Under Trump, he said, no, we're putting all the sanctions on. But that's called a maximum pressure campaign. It refers to the intensified sanctions against Iran by the Trump administration after the United States exited the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, in 2018. The campaign was aimed at pressuring Iran to renegotiate the JCPOA, adding more restrictions on Iran's nuclear program and expanding the scope of the agreement to cover Iran's ballistic missiles as well as other regional activities. This strategy was faced by Iran's counter pressure policy to thwart the U.S. maximum pressure campaign. According to Human Rights Watch, the current economic sanctions are causing unnecessary suffering to Iranian citizens afflicted with a range of diseases and medical conditions, despite exemptions for the humanitarian goods. In February 2025, amidst the Iranian energy and economic crisis, Trump signed an executive order to restore the maximum pressure policy against the Iranian regime. And obviously, this past weekend, because today's Monday, they did go and bomb those three nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and I can't remember the other one. I don't remember the names of them, but I've seen them on TV. But anyway, if you're familiar with it, then you know what I'm talking about. Okay. So it's the sanctions in May 2018. Then U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran and imposed several new non-nuclear sanctions against Iran, some of which were condemned by Iran as a violation of the deal. In November 2018, the U.S. officially reimposed all sanctions against Iran that had been lifted before the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA. Elizabeth Rosenberg, a former U.S. Treasury Department official, told NPR that the program included sanctioning some Iranian financial institutions not previously designated and that were previously used to facilitate food, medicine, and medical imports. To this end, most large Iranian financial institutions are subject to sanctions. On June 7, 2025, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed sanctions on 10 individuals and 27 entities, including Iranian nationals and firms based in the UAE and Hong Kong. These targets included the Zaring Hallam brothers, accused of laundering billions via shell companies tied to the IRGC and Iran's central bank. The funds reportedly supported Iran's nuclear and missile programs, oil sales, and terrorist proxies. And remember, Trump has been saying for years and years and years, because this has been an ongoing thing with them, that they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Anyway, so outcomes, according to the report from the International Monetary Fund, Iran's gross official reserves fell from an average of 70 billion in 2017 to 4 billion in 2020. Certain analysts believe the campaign failed to change Iran's regional activities or counter Iran's proxy influence in the region, force Iran to renegotiate Oh, excuse me, did I say that wrong? 70 billion in 2017 to 4 billion. Okay, sorry. It renegotiate the nuclear deal and hinder its nuclear and missile programs. In 2019, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said the U.S. sanctions had deprived the Iranian economy of 200 billion in oil revenue and investments. Senior officials in the administration of Ibrahim Raisi, the president of Iran, who took office after the maximum pressure campaign's termination, claimed that oil sales in the initial months of Raisi's president had jumped by 40% despite being under stringent U.S. sanctions. The campaign was criticized by some foreign policy analysts as being poorly conceived and counterproductive to other American foreign policy goals. David Walsh, writing for the Atlantic Council, posited that an exclusively punitive policy unaccompanied by diplomatic off-ramps incentivizes Tehran to fight fire with fire by imposing cost on its perceived aggressors. Other concerns had been raised regarding the negative effect of the program on the welfare of the Iranian populace. One analysis by Human Rights Watch argued the redoubled U.S. sanctions had effectively constrained Iran's ability to finance humanitarian imports due to the broad U.S. sanctions against Iranian banks, accompanied by the aggressive rhetoric from U.S. officials. The intensified sanctions have seriously threatened Iran's right to health and access to essential medicines, causing documented shortages ranging from a lack of vital drugs for patients with epilepsy to limit chemotherapy medications for treating Iranian cancer patients. Reactions: the UAE, or United Arab Emirates, expressed its absolute support for the United States continuing the maximum pressure against Iran. Israeli politicians have also expressed support for the program. The United Nations Special Rapporteur, I don't know how you say that, on human rights in Iran said in July 2019 that he was not only concerned that sanctions and banking restrictions will unduly affect food security and the availability and distribution of medicines, pharmaceutical equipment, and supplies, but is also concerned at their potential negative impact on the United Nations and other operations and programs in the country. In November 2021, during the presidency of Ibrahim Raisi and the beginning of a new round of nuclear talks, Ali Bagheri Khani, Iran's chief nuclear negotiator, has said that in the seventh round of talks to revive the IAEA nuclear deal, the Islamic Republic of Iran called for the lifting of all sanctions against the U.S. campaign of maximum pressure as a prelude to the resumption of talks. And then I think when Biden got in, he actually released all those sanctions on them. And so then they felt emboldened, I think, to cause the havoc they've been causing. And then here, so February 4th of 2025 is this fact sheet. President Donald J. Trump restores maximum pressure on Iran. Restoring maximum pressure on Iran today, President Donald J. Trump signed a national security presidential memorandum, or NSPM, restoring maximum pressure on the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, denying Iran all path to a nuclear weapon, and countering Iran's malign influence abroad. The NSPM establishes that Iran should be denied a nuclear weapon and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Iran's terrorist network should be neutralized, and Iran's aggressive development of missiles, as well as other asymmetric and conventional weapons capabilities, should be countered. The NSPM directs the Secretary of the Treasury to impose maximum economic pressure on the government of Iran, including by sanctioning or imposing enforcement mechanisms on those acting in violation of existing sanctions. The Treasury Secretary will also issue guidance for all relevant business sectors, including shipping, insurance, and port operators, about the risk to any person that knowingly violates U.S. sanctions with respect to Iran or Iranian terror proxy. The Secretary of State will also modify or rescind existing sanction waivers and cooperate with the Secretary of Treasury to implement a campaign aimed at driving Iran's oil exports to zero. The United States permanent representative to the United Nations will work with key allies to complete the snapback of international sanctions and restrictions on Iran, protecting the homeland from Iran. The previous administration's tolerance of Iran's threats to American citizens and companies ends now. The Attorney General will pursue all available legal steps to investigate, disrupt, and prosecute financial and logistical networks, operatives, or front groups inside the United States that are sponsored by Iran or an Iranian terror proxy. The Attorney General will prosecute leaders and members of Iranian-funded terrorist groups that have captured, harmed, or killed American citizens and seek their arrest and extradition to the United States. Taking Iran's nuclear program off the table, President Trump will not tolerate Iran possessing a nuclear weapons capability, nor will he stand for their sustained sponsorship of terrorism, especially against U.S. interests. In 2020, President Trump declared that as long as he is president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Today's NSPM fulfills the president's 2020 vow to contend with Iran's pernicious influence around the globe. For far too long, all the way back to 1979 to be exact, nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world, and we will never let that happen. And then the actual, hold on, where is it at? So the United States sanctions against Iran, this started back in 1989 following the Iranian Revolution. So, I mean, obviously this is going on for a long time. But anyway, I will probably just link this in there if you want to look it up. I'm sure if we go through and actually find the sanctions against Iran, it'll be like some government document, and that would be actually better than the Wikipedia page. But I mean, sometimes they say that some of this stuff is pretty well monitored, and then there's also citations at the very end. So you can always go back and look at that stuff. I may go through parts of this, but dang, this one's long. I mean, I'm not saying that it's, everything, but it's got a lot of information. Yeah, it's got a lot of citations here. Wow. Anyway, I may come back and look at this one. We'll see. But I will talk to y'all later. Have a good afternoon. I'll get these loaded up as quick as possible because I gotta do a little bit of editing. Not much, not much at all. It was like, this is it. I'm a real person. I make mistakes. I do my best. Anyway, I will talk to y'all later. Have a good one. Bye.